Actor James Cromwell is best known for TV and movies like Babe, but his most significant role may be in service to the animals through selfless acts of civil disobedience. His protesting the cruel Texas A&amp dog lab experiments have made a difference. How to get arrested for the good of the animals, next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, a veteran animal rights activist talks about getting arrested with James Cromwell and about the power of celebrity and civil disobedience in the fight to end dog experiments at Texas A&amp.
Frankly, it took the star of Babe getting arrested, and now finally everyone's gaze is, set on Texas A&M University. And for the record, Jamie feels the same way. James Cromwell, expressed the same sentiments to me. I think he's expressed them publicly too, that, he's there because he knows he's star power, and, star power can be used for good, and it's not just to land a new contract on some reality show. It's also to bring attention to serious issues that are being overlooked. And, that definitely happened at Texas A&M University. That extensive media coverage, overall, in my opinion, that means mission was accomplished there.
Jeremy Beckham, a former PETA laboratory investigations specialist and now executive director of the Utah Animal Rights Coalition, UARC, has been arrested twice with James Cromwell, most recently at Texas A&M. In this interview, Jeremy talks about what it means for a celebrity or anyone to put their bodies on the line for the animals. Beckham demystifies civil disobedience as he describes a day that he and Cromwell protested at College Station in Texas, got arrested for speaking out at a Texas A&M Regents meeting. It was all nonviolent, yet they were both charged with the highest possible misdemeanor, the same level as a DUI causing bodily injury. Beckham gives tips on getting arrested if you're so moved, why you should and why you shouldn't, and if you do, what to expect in the process. All that on the PETA Podcast. So, Jeremy, good to talk to you again. Just for the benefit of our audience, where are we when it comes to Texas A&M and really ending the kind of tests that they're doing over there?
A lot of progress has been made in getting Texas A&M University to end its hideously cruel muscular dystrophy experiments on dogs. So for over 3 decades, an experimenter at Texas A&M University has been intentionally breeding dogs to express this debilitating and painful condition, a canine form of muscular dystrophy. The good news is that the new breeding of these dogs has stopped. And so there is some light at the end of this tunnel, we believe. And I have no doubt that that decision was made because of the immense pressure that's been placed on Texas A&M University from PETA and millions of other supporters as well. We're not completely in the clear, though, because as I speak to you now, there are somewhere between 30 and 40 dogs, mostly golden retrievers, who sit in their cages at Texas A&M University with this disease, or they're carriers of the disease, one or the other. So there still are some dogs there. They're still running some tests on these dogs. What we need to do is end these experiments once and for all, not just for future generations that are not going to be born, but from the dogs that are sitting in their cages now. It needs to stop for all of them.
Good progress, but it's still happening. It's not over yet. You are now the executive director of UARC, the Utah Animal Rights Coalition, and a former key member of PETA. Now you are running your own organization. You felt compelled to go through civil disobedience at this point. Describe your preparation and your decision to go forward with that act of committing an act of civil disobedience.
I think the thing to remember is no matter what the government or our opposition can do to us, this is something that I always remind myself of. It can never be as bad as what the animals are going through, whether it's in laboratories in this case or inside animal agricultural facilities. And so I think that there are times that all of us are motivated to put our bodies on the lines, to make some sort of sacrifice as a statement, to call attention to a much greater injustice that's going on. In this case, of course, the famed actor James Cromwell, I know, is an individual who's similarly motivated to try to make a statement and to use the power of arrest of yourself to call attention to something that's happening. Mr. Cromwell, I know, has been arrested with PETA. He's been arrested with me personally one other time besides this instance, and he's been arrested with PETA at other occasions, and he's also been arrested for other causes as well, including environmental protests. So I think that the decision that goes into that is when other means of redress seem to be failing. And, believe me, PETA has spent years sending letters, writing elected officials, filing complaints, filing lawsuits at Texas A&M University. And when all of these things are still failing to achieve what is really just a reasonable demand for justice and compassion, there are times when then escalation is justified. And I think that that's kind of the thought process that goes in to committing an act of civil disobedience.
So this was that time for you. It had reached that point. And how did you have to prepare for this moment? Because this is no small thing to put your body on the line, to get arrested. It had reached this point. What was the sign to you that said, this is it? It's got to happen, and now I have to prepare? What were the mental preparations that you had to go through to make sure that you were good on this decision of yours and that you were going to go through with this on that day?
I think the main mental preparations are primarily, honestly, just reminding myself why I'm doing it. Keeping the larger purpose in mind, remembering the dogs. Actually, earlier that same day, James Cromwell and I drove to try to actually go to the laboratory itself. We wanted to actually see the building, get as close as we legally could, really, to the dogs who were imprisoned there. And partially, I think that was to make it more real for us, to remind us why, each of us flew across the country, really, to College Station, Texas, to make a statement about what we were doing. So I think that's the primary way I mentally prepare myself. And then I think the second way is just having an understanding that it fits into a larger strategic context, that it's part of a campaign with reasonable goals and demands, and that campaign has reached a level of maturity that warrants that kind of action that may, go against the law. So I think it's kind of those two things, understanding the importance of why you're there and also the strategic relevance of why you're there.
When you and James Cromwell saw the building, any thoughts? Did you have a feeling? I mean, you'd seen it before, or was this your first time in College Station?
This was actually my first time in College Station. I think his too. I know that a number of the dogs, it was my understanding, had recently been moved to where they are now. And where they are now at Texas A&M University, perhaps this is not much of a surprise, but it's well behind a gate. So you couldn't even really get very close to the building itself. And the building had a euphemistic name. I honestly forget right now even what it was called. It was something like Interspecies Research Building or something like that. Really, we could only drive up to the gate. And, we could see a building way off in the distance. They know that these places, if they're, ever present as a reminder for students, well, that just invites scrutiny and attention and criticism. So they like to put their animal labs well out of sight, well out of mind. That's a common pattern I've seen at other labs too, by the way. Most of the National Primate Research Centers, which are these huge primate labs, are similarly situated way behind a private driveway where you can't even see the building. So that was unfortunately all we could see at Texas A&M. But I mean, it still was, even that sent a message to us. I mean, I don't think an institution of higher learning should have compounds that are like Fort Knox on them. I mean, I think that indicates that they're doing something wrong. And that's not really, to me, what the image of an institution of higher learning. It's not what I think of. And so I think it was still a reminder for us, but we couldn't get, super close to the facility.
When you were there, I know in the past there have been protests and students have protested as well as animal rights activists. It was just kind of a normal day there, right? Like this is sort of normal procedure, not exactly in plain sight, sort of off the beaten path, but this is something that's kind of accepted at Texas A&M, right?
I think, honestly, there's still a number of students who don't even know it's happening. I mean, obviously, PETA's constantly doing outreach there, and that's reaching undoubtedly thousands of people. But the way university campuses are, there's, each year, there's a whole new group of thousands of people that cycle in, and thousands of other people graduate and move on. And so a lot of people are still learning about this stuff for the first time. The building on campus, like I was mentioning to you, has a euphemistic name. It doesn't say animal laboratory or dog laboratory. So a lot of people wouldn't even know what it was. It's kind of tucked away as well, that building. It's not really near any of the high traffic parts of campus. So I think a lot of students just don't know about it. I mean, the ones that do hear about it, I'm sure that at least some of them fall under the spell of the university self-serving propaganda and think that it's, doing something meaningful, even when it hasn't produced a single cure or therapy in over 3 decades. But I mean, I think also a lot of people are upset, honestly and truthfully, especially when they see the footage. I think the footage of the dogs in this laboratory barely able to stand or eat because of their muscles that have wasted away due to this disease they've intentionally given them. I think a lot of people know that it's wrong. And so I think that that's one of our main jobs, is just to keep the issue alive and let people know this is even happening on their campus.
You're there with the actor James Cromwell. You see the building. Describe the moments up to the arrest.
So the Board of Regents were having one of their regular routine meetings there at College Station. And before the meeting, we first held a small protest outside the building. I think there were probably about 10 of us total, maybe 10 to 15, holding signs saying, "Tamu, shut the dog lab down." There was someone dressed in a giant golden retriever dog costume to, call attention to why we're there and help communicate our message. After we were outside for a little while, we moved inside. And one thing about the Texas A&M Board of Regents meetings that's actually kind of unique in my experience is it's in this great big room, like a big conference room. And in the very back of the room, the furthest part of the room from where the people are speaking, there's actually kind of a designated free speech area where you can stand legally and hold a silent protest. Once the meeting started, we all migrated up there and we decided to just stand there in the back of the room where that free speech area is.
And what about the students or other Texas A&M community members? Were they joining in? I know that Texas A&M, they're known as the Aggies, but it's also a kind of a military school as well, or it's got a strong military presence. What was the reaction like from, community members there?
I didn't personally speak with a lot of members of the university community while we were there. We weren't there for too long. I mean, I bet you from start to finish, we were probably on campus less than an hour. I mean, a number of people did join our protest. I think they probably were on PETA's action team email list, is my suspicion, and received an email. Some people had driven there from Houston and Austin. So people had come from a lot of surrounding areas to College Station specifically for this protest. And a number of them had told me that this wasn't their first time protesting as part of this campaign too. They were, these were some extremely dedicated, wonderful activists who have been doing this literally for years now, by the way. There was one person who had a trespassing order from Texas A&M University. And basically, the university told this person, you can't return to campus for 2 years, or else you'll be arrested for trespassing. And they waited that whole 2 years. And when their trespassing order expired, here they were back again. So that was the kind of dedication that some of these people had. They were just wonderful people.
You have the protest. Now describe the arrest. The police, campus cops, I imagine, campus security, do they immediately come to sweep in, or describe the ordeal?
So we were standing there in the back of the room, And we wanted to wait until someone directly in the Texas A&M University administration was speaking to try to make a statement. Someone with some direct kind of authority over what happens at that campus and could theoretically probably order the halt to these experiments. And so in this case, it was the chancellor of the university, Chancellor Sharp. And not long after he started speaking was when we decided to make our statement, I guess you could say. And although we're allowed to stand in the back of the room, what this meeting does lack is a public comment period. Some meetings of government have a period where they invite members of the public to come to the mic and speak their piece. This one doesn't have that. So what we did was we made our own public comment period. And, it started, I think I just stepped forward to, trying to draw attention to myself to the whole room. And, of course, in this room, there are surely some local reporters as well, since this is a big government meeting. And everyone's eyes kind of turned to me, and I was holding one of the signs. And that was when I shouted out a sentence. I think I said, "Shame on Texas A&M University for experimenting on dogs."
How many people were attending the Regents meeting?
Gosh, it's hard to estimate because the room is so big. It was kind of empty, but it was big and empty. I'm going to estimate, I don't know, a few dozen, if I had to guess, a few dozen.
So not a big meeting, but all the power players were there. The people who had to be there who were important were there.
Exactly. Yep. And, it definitely has, legal significance for the operation of the university. It's something that's covered by the media pretty routinely. That's where they, do things like review this multi-million-dollar budget and stuff for that university. They're very important meetings. And so when I stepped forward and shouted out that sentence, and, I wanted to make sure my voice projected, so I said it rather loudly. Almost immediately, I think it was the second I was done with that sentence, Texas A&M University police officer, stepped forward and kind of grabbed my arm and, said in my ear, "Campus police, you need to stop immediately and come with me." He said something along those lines. I may not remember exactly word for word what he said, but he put a stop to me pretty quickly.
Was it aggressive? Did it feel like force, or was it gentle? Was he treating you nicely?
I would call it assertive. Probably not aggressive. I mean, we've all seen, in this day and age, police brutality videos that obviously far exceed the treatment I received. So I don't want to, pretend like I'm a martyr at the hands of abuse, because I wasn't by any means. But I mean, he definitely grabbed my arm and, very firmly told me to stop right away.
In the back of your mind, did you prepare and say, okay, I'm going to get arrested? But a lot of people that I've seen, or that, I've seen video, they immediately go limp in order to force the police, right, or the security people to then lift them away. What was right. How did you approach it?
When James Cromwell and I did a somewhat similar demonstration several years ago at the University of Wisconsin, we were protesting cat experiments that were going on there, and we disrupted a Board of Regents meeting there too. And at that meeting, I went limp, like you're describing, and had to be dragged out. Here at Texas A&M University, honestly, we weren't expecting to get arrested, actually. We really weren't. And so I didn't go limp. I mean, I stopped. As soon as the officer put his hand on me and said, "You need to stop it right now and come with me," I stopped. And I mean, I started walking out with him. As I started walking out with him, I started to hear Mr. Cromwell begin his public comment period, his extemporaneous public comment period. And, I wasn't able to really see exactly what he was doing because I was being escorted out of the room, but I could hear that he was making a similar demonstration there in the room. But I did stop immediately when the officer told me to stop, and I was escorted out of the room. And I was honestly pretty surprised when they took me outside of the room and started cuffing me right there. Because I have in the past also done noisy demonstrations inside buildings and been told to leave. And honestly, 95% of the time, that's basically the end of it. They say, "Get out of here, buddy, and don't come back." And you say, "Okay, I'll get out of here and I won't come back." But I think Texas A&M University must be feeling some pretty intense heat and pressure right now. And the way they're kind of retaliating is to, try to give it back.
Well, you weren't resisting, right? You weren't doing anything violent.
Not at all.
You stopped speaking, And yet, did they say you're under arrest, or was it just de facto, here are the cuffs that came out and no Miranda rights and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, when you're cuffed, you're arrested. I don't think
Yeah.
they said the words "you're under arrest," but when they brought when they brought me and Jamie out into the hallway and they started putting our cuffs on, I knew. I think I heard them getting on the radio to arrange a transport. And they didn't give us our Miranda rights, but they didn't interrogate us either. So you don't really need to Mirandize someone if you don't interrogate them. I don't think there's any information they need to get. It's pretty transparent what happened. I mean, we were filming it, they were filming it. There's a million videos out there. I think, PETA on, its Facebook page posted our protest there at the Board of Regents meeting within a couple hours. Already hundreds of thousands of people that follow PETA on Facebook were seeing it. So I don't think there's any, real secret about what we did. The way they reacted is rather extreme. But, that happens sometimes. I think, all of us who are activists fighting in the trenches and stuff, from time to time, we're going to see, trumped up charges brought against us, to try to silence us and scare us. So it happens.
And yet, when you saw this reaction and were surprised by it, since you had stopped, speaking, and you went with them peacefully out, away from the chambers, were you then fearful at all? Was there any fear at that point that, well, who knows what's going to happen here now?
Well, honestly, the main thing on my mind, this is the honest truth, when Jamie and I were being led into the squad car, was, I hope this is getting a lot of attention. That's just the honest truth. And I saw, obviously, there were a lot of people photographing us around us, and I mostly felt good about it because I knew that, it's been a little difficult sometimes to get attention in the public consciousness and in the media about what's happening to animals in labs. It's just so secretive and out of sight and out of mind. People don't even know lots of times that they live near an animal lab. And so whenever there's ways that we can kind of pierce through that, that veil of ignorance in our society, where people don't even know this is happening, I think it's a good thing. And, and if it takes me and, a Hollywood actor getting arrested to make that happen, that's a bargain I'm fine with. So that was honestly the main thing I was thinking. Now, obviously, when you're put in the back of a cop car, and the drive to jail was much longer than I would have guessed. The Brazos County Detention Facility was a good ways away from the university campus. There's a lot of things you just don't know. I mean, you don't know where you're going. You don't know what the conditions are going to be like there. You don't really know how long you're going to be there. I mean, generally speaking, you're not going to be there more than, I would say in the most extreme cases, a day or two. And so it's something that I think, generally speaking, you can handle. And I want everyone to know that, because I think it's important for animal advocates at times, when it's strategic, to do things that might put them at risk of arrest. I think that that's an important part of any social justice movement, including the animal rights movement. And so I think it's important that we demystify it a little bit and let people know it's not extreme terror. You know what I mean? You can handle it. And like I said at the beginning of this conversation, it's nothing compared to what the animals are going to be going through. I mean, fortunately, bond was posted for me and Jamie after about, I don't know, we were probably in jail 4 or 5 hours, something like that. And so we got out of 4 or 5 hours, but there's no such thing as posting bond for these dogs who were in that laboratory. They were there when we got arrested. They were there when we got out. They're still there now, weeks later. And so, I think that kind of perspective is personally, for me, what motivates me and, gets me through this.
So tell me, you got to jail, you were feeling good, and you're hoping this was getting attention, and it was. When you were there, describe the jail experience. You were arrested for what, and where did they put you, and what was it like being in jail for 4 to 5 hours?
Sure. So one thing that was interesting was that the facility itself, like the building, looked a lot like Madison, Wisconsin, when Jamie and I were arrested 6 years ago. And so that was just surreal in a weird way. Like, I think literally they had the same floor plan. And in fact, we mentioned that to one of the staff members at the jail, and they said that there are some common floor plans that county jails use, and this uses one of them. So that was just kind of a weird thing that 6 years later, Jamie and I were brought into a building that looked exactly like the same one we were in 6 years ago.
Yeah, it was like a reunion.
It was kind of like a reunion. Yeah, 6 years later, 6.5 years later. And so, we both commented on that. And I mean, frankly, when we get there, understandably, Jamie's the star, both, literally and figuratively here in this jail. A lot of jail staff wanted to come meet him and shake his hand and talk to him. And so that was just kind of weird and surreal. But, they put us through processing where we had to, give them our shoelaces, and I had to give them my necktie and things like that. We never really went into the general population of the jail, where you might stay for days. We were always just kind of held in this front area for processing that other people are basically right when you're arrested, you go in there while you wait to hear what your bond is.
So what were the charges and what was the bond?
So the charges against both of us, there's a special statute in Texas that is something like disrupting an official proceeding through disorderly conduct. So this is actually a specific law for, making a ruckus in a governmental meeting. So if I would have gone in and made a ruckus at, a board of directors meeting of Walmart, I would actually not be facing as severe of a crime. And, to me, that's actually has it backwards in a way. I mean, I think, where government interfaces with people, that's where democracy needs to happen the most. And sometimes democracy is going to be a little messy and people are going to make a little bit of a ruckus. And that happens. So to me, this is an anti-democratic, small d democratic statute that they have there in Texas. And it's a Class A misdemeanor, this statute in Texas, which is one level below felony. And we looked up other Class A misdemeanors to understand what the level of offense is. It's punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a fine. And I honestly forget right now what the fine amount was, but it was up to a year in jail and a fine. And other Class A misdemeanors include DUI with bodily injury. So if we would have driven drunk and hit a pedestrian and hurt them, in the eyes of Texas, that's the same as going into a governmental meeting and shouting a sentence.
Right. And protesting what they're doing to these poor dogs at the labs.
Exactly.
I mean, although subject matter isn't as important, right? I mean,
the statute just says if you disrupt an official proceeding, in this case, because the Texas A&M University is a public university, that means this Board of Regents meeting is an arm of the government. And so we're disrupting a governmental meeting. And so in the eyes of the state of Texas, the law of the state of Texas, that's just as bad as if I would have ran over a pedestrian while I was driving drunk, which I just find morally offensive, frankly. I mean, I said one sentence while I was in there. Everyone in that room is fine. When I leave, no one has lasting damage. If I, hit a pedestrian and, break their legs or something, that's lasting damage and injury that I actually did to another person because of my acts of negligence, And so I just find that just outrageous, frankly, that such a statute exists. But that is what, Jamie and I are both being charged in. And I think, some generous donor, I don't even know who it was, truthfully, but some generous donor out there posted $5,000 to get us out of jail for each one of us. So they, put up a total of $10,000.
Well, so you were allowed to go free. I'm not sure if those people in that room wouldn't want to undergo some kind of psychological testing to see if they were damaged, just to prove you wrong. But maybe that would be extreme.
I don't think they were damaged as much as being hit by a car.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I think they would choose being in that room over getting hit by a car any day of the week.
So you leave 4 to 5 hours after you get someone posting your bond, and some reflections now. You talked earlier about demystifying this whole experience. Talk about that in terms of your feeling good about what you did. I mean, I'm assuming you feel good about what you did.
I mean, obviously not long after we got out of jail, we met back up with some other activists, and, they were showing us all the news coverage that was proceeding. It was picked up by the Associated Press, so it was really all over. It was reproduced in the New York Times. I think the Hollywood Reporter covered it. People magazine was one of the first ones to cover it. And so that absolutely, delighted me, because I have seen time and time again that what really finally creates change for animals in labs is when the media is really paying attention to it. I mean, that's just a common pattern I've seen a lot. And that's why the universities try to keep everything so secret. You have to sue them to get their records. They don't put on the side of the building that it's an animal lab, because they know if people start to pay attention to it and there's discussion that starts around it, that eventually they can't take that kind of heat, and so they stop doing it. And so I think media attention is pretty much always a necessary ingredient for change here. And so that absolutely delighted me. I think it's kind of a little bit of a sad statement on the state of affairs in media in the United States that, I don't know how many dozens or maybe at this point hundreds of scientists that PETA has gotten to condemn these experiments on dogs. The footage is, transparently cruel. There's already a track record of failure that spans more than 3 decades. None of this, interested the Associated Press, that millions of our tax dollars are being wasted. Frankly, it took the star of Babe getting arrested, and now finally everyone's gaze is, set on Texas A&M University. And for the record, Jamie feels the same way. James Cromwell, expressed the same sentiments to me. I think he's expressed them publicly too, that, he's there because he knows he's star power, and, star power can be used for good, and it's not just to land a new contract on some reality show. It's also to bring attention to serious issues that are being overlooked. And, that definitely happened at Texas A&M University. That extensive media coverage, overall, in my opinion, that means mission was accomplished there.
Well, it definitely is star power in action. But what does it say to the person who is not a star, drives in from, some part of Texas, some part of East Texas to be part of this, gets arrested, and there's no James Cromwell, and there's no coverage? Is it still worth it? Is it still worth doing this act of civil disobedience?
I think that's a great question. I think every case and campaign is its own beast, and it should be thought of strategically. I'm sorry if that's kind of a vague, ambiguous answer, but it might be the case that a couple people being arrested who are not celebrities is not worth it. It's not worth the time and expense and the effort and all the court dates they have to go to, because no one's really going to pay attention. And so all that happens is you put a few people through the ringer for no end. On the other hand, if you're doing something like I, learned about a case, I think it was just earlier this year, where hundreds and hundreds of activists descended on, this horrible duck factory farm in California, and went inside the slaughterhouse and chained themselves to the machinery of the slaughterhouse. That got a lot of media attention because of the spectacle you're creating. So, you can create a spectacle that grabs the public's imagination and the attention without a celebrity. I don't think a celebrity is necessarily necessary, but you should think bigger picture and strategically about it, and not just say, I'm going to get arrested for the sake of being arrested. Does that kind of make sense? That's how I view it.
Well, you weren't evasive at all. You answered the question. And I think it does bring up this point about how do you know that your action and your sacrifice works? At what point do you say, yeah, I made a difference? I guess you got the publicity. But
that's right.
If the publicity wasn't there, does that mean you failed?
I think it depends on what your overall strategy is. There are some strategies for change that don't need publicity. I mean, all you need to do is ask something like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, who goes in and writes all of these industry-friendly bills that get passed at state legislatures across the country. They, are able to create a lot of change, I would argue, for the worse in this country without any attention. So, it depends on what your overall strategy is. But I think that that's the point that if I was going to give, activists out there listening to this, the main lesson to me is just make sure it's fitting into a larger strategy. And then you're not just getting arrested because you think that's some sort of like natural rung on some sort of ladder. It has to fit into a bigger conception of what you're trying to achieve. What's your goal? How do you get there? Who are the decision makers or the people that can actually create that change you want? And how do you either win them over with carrots or, beat them into submission with sticks? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have some sort of idea of how you're going to arrive at that. And it may very well be, getting arrested. I mean, obviously we have a long tradition in the United States of activists of all stripes getting arrested and, advancing their causes tremendously. But you also have counterexamples to that as well. I mean, I think in the long run, it turns out the prohibitionists failed. There were a lot of people agitating for that. And for a little while, they happened to succeed and get an amendment to the Constitution. But in the long run, all of those people that sometimes, believe it or not, there were people doing civil disobedience for prohibition and campaigning for that. In the long run, they failed. And so you can learn something by looking at why some issues succeed and others fail. But it's complicated. There's not one formula for it all. And the other thing that's really hard, and this is just the sad reality of it, in my opinion, it is hard to predict. Sometimes it's very hard to predict what creates change. It's just so many complicated factors go into that. Is American culture ripe for that change? Did you happen to hit, let's say just to take the example that just happened at Texas A&amp University. If me and Jamie had done that on the same day by coincidence that, Kim Kardashian showed up at Texas A&amp University to sign autographs, we might not have got media attention. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you never know what all of these factors are that go into these things. Is it a slow news day or are you competing with other things? So it's tricky. And there's not one right answer.
Yeah, and there's that. And then there's also the fact that the reaction on the part of the police and campus officials, totally unpredictable as well. Did you fear at all that could have been a violent confrontation, even though you are not violent? Did you fear at all that it could have been?
I think, frankly, almost every interaction we have with police in the United States is a potentially violent interaction. I wish that wasn't the case. Obviously, there's some factors and variables that can make things more, higher or lower risk. But sure, I mean, I definitely think that frankly, police in this country are given a lot of latitude, I think. And I know of cases where police have, roughed up activists and gotten away with it. And so, I think that that's always something that could happen. I mean, fortunately, it didn't happen to me in this case. But you do never know, they carry tasers, they carry pepper spray, they even carry guns, and so it's always something that's a possibility. But I also think that we can't let the fear of the worst case scenario, we can't let that prevent us from taking action.
Did you ever feel that, okay, I'm with James Cromwell, the actor, the famous actor, he's kind of like my celebrity shield. Did you ever feel that?
I felt that maybe a little bit, but at the same time, you never know if people are going to recognize him. I mean, obviously a lot of people did, but some people didn't. Even in the jail, I heard, different jail staff say to each other, you know who that is, right? And someone said, no, who's that? And so you never really know that. Or sometimes someone might think, Jamie himself told me all the time people come up to him and say, man, you really look like that actor James Cromwell. Has anyone ever told you that? Which is obviously hilarious, but they're being sincere. You might think he just looks like him, but that can't possibly be really him. It's him, but other people might not. And he's aware of that too. So, he was also putting his body on the line. And by the way, taking a much bigger risk than me, just because, this is, all the credit to him. But he's 79 years old and still putting his body on the line. He's had at least one knee replacement, I know. Watching them kind of stuff him in the back of that squad car, I could tell it was causing him extreme pain. There's basically zero leg room in the back of a police car. They don't want that to be comfortable. Just on a level of personal pain and misery, sacrificed a great deal more than I did. I give him all the credit in the world for that.
Yeah, and he's done it, and he does it without hesitation. Once again, you mentioned this idea of demystifying civil disobedience for our listeners and for other activists. What would you say to them if they're ever thinking about civil disobedience? Clearly, civil disobedience isn't dead, but how would you demystify it so that people won't be afraid if they feel called?
I would say a few things. First is it never hurts if you can find a friendly local attorney to just have a general conversation with ahead of time, just to have a basic understanding of what you're potentially facing. You can have those kinds of privileged conversations with attorneys just to know, if we did X, Y, Z, what do you see as the possible and or likely ramifications? And would you represent us if this happened? Or if you have potential and have something in mind for potential representation too. Obviously you're going to want an attorney when you come out the other side of this. And the other thing I would recommend is just have a clear, easily executable plan, and plan for every step of it. Plan for your media plan. What reporters are you going to notify? Have a logistical plan. Where am I going to enter the building? Make sure you have a picture in your head of every single step of what you're going to do, because I think that makes it that much easier to execute the day of. And that way you don't find an excuse to get cold feet and not to do it. You need to have a plan every step of the way. And, do a little bit of research online. There's a lot of good resources out there on civil disobedience. Like, a common thing you'll hear people say, write the phone number of your attorney on your body. Because when you get arrested and taken to jail, they're going to take your phone, they're going to take all your personal property, and then they're going to say, here, you can call your attorney, and they'll hand you a phone from 20 years ago, with numbers on it. and if you don't know a phone number to dial, most people don't know phone numbers anymore. They're all saved in your contacts. You're just out of luck. And so write your attorney's phone number on your body so you are able to call them while you're in jail. Have a plan for, what if I'm held there for a while and I need vegan food? Who's going to call the jail, to pressure them to give me vegan food? So there's just a lot of logistical steps that I think people should do, and then they'll feel better about it as well. They'll feel more prepared, they'll feel more confident and ready to do it.
Helpful hints from a veteran activist. Jeremy, I appreciate it. One last question, a quick question. Any doubts that the protest and the civil disobedience at Texas A&M worked?
No doubt at all.
Jeremy, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Emil.
Jeremy Beckham, a former PETA laboratory investigation specialist and now the executive director of the Utah Animal Rights Coalition, UARC. He has now been arrested twice with actor James Cromwell in civil disobedience for the animals, most recently to protest the dog labs at Texas A&M. Find out more about their arrest and why it was so important to be arrested at Texas A&M. Go to PETA.org. And that's our program. Hey, you can contact us at PETA.org. Find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog, or on my website, amok.com, AMOK.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about, or wherever you podcast or catch your pods, you can find us. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. Listening. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.